Hello, I'm Attorney Todd Leneve.
And I'm Dave Jansen.
Welcome to West Virginia Gun Law. Today we're going to take a look at a video that happened here in our local area that highlights a lot of interesting topics from a self-defense perspective and also just a general stupidity perspective. So stick around, we'll take a look at that. So today we've got an interesting topic, I think. This is, we're going to do a breakdown on a video from a traffic event that occurred coming out of a shopping area here in Harrison County, where we are. And this particular intersection has a lot of challenges. And it's right on the border of two law enforcement jurisdictions, one of which happens to be where Dave's agency is. And he gets to deal with things there, I think, fairly often. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about some of the problems, some of the things that we tend to see up there that virtually anybody who lives in this area has probably encountered at some point or another.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is such a high traffic area. Part of the issues or challenges that are faced here is that, first of all, this intersection is connected to a major highway. There is a very short corral that leads into a highly trafficked area. With this, the timing on the lights, that kind of throws it off a little bit, but there's also a bunch of lines and people seem to get confused by these lines. I'll go ahead and throw a hint. If the line is solid, don't cross it, okay? If it's dotted, by all means, you can cross it.
I think that was on my driver's test back when I was 16.
Somewhere. It's in there somewhere. But, ultimately, that's kind of what led to this event, was a series of problems with people not paying attention to the way the rules of the road are, as well as a little bit of impatience, it seems.
Yeah. Well, this intersection, it's generally a T shape.
Correct. Yes.
And it, as you said, empties onto a highway. Now, granted, it's a controlled access highway, but it is a 4-lane, in places 5-lane road, nonetheless. Yeah. And the T intersection seems to be what throws people off, because you will frequently have people who are attempting to go straight through the T get cut off, get blocked by people who are coming from the other side, coming down the short side of the T, and vice versa. I mean, it happens just about every different direction possible at that intersection.
Well, then people become frustrated with the lights and want to squeeze up in, and ultimately end up blocking intersections, which again you'll see.
Yeah, and it's definitely a long sequence of lights, and if you don't get through, it can be frustrating to get stuck and realize you've got to go a whole nother sequence that is going to take you probably a good 3 to 4 minutes, and so a lot there that can readily create frustration. But I think we should go ahead and take a look at the video here, and then there's a lot that I think we can break down out of this. So without any further ado, I'm going to have a very popular 80s rap icon go ahead and introduce this video for us.
Stop. Hammer time.
Interesting encounter here, obviously. Not the kind of thing you often see. Plenty of other issues up there, but this one was pretty unique. One of the techniques employed by the aggressor here kind of brought to mind an old cartoon segment. Yeah, it would have been great if it would have ended up like that. That would have just been pure comic gold there. But didn't quite play out that way. But as we said earlier, Dave, there's a lot that you could unpack from this situation.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it's key to illustrate right from the beginning here that under West Virginia's laws currently, you have no right to use any level of force in defense of property, your stuff, your things. We need to be more like Texas in that regard, where you can use up to deadly force in defense of property, but we may not do that here. So any actions taken to protect the vehicle really would have been limited to a verbal warning, hey, don't hit my truck, don't do what you're doing, don't touch my vehicle. But of course, when we're talking about defense of the individual, we have the absolute right to use the appropriate level of force to meet the threat that's presented to us.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody would dispute that a hammer represents a deadly force threat. You get hit the right way in the right spot with a hammer, and you very well may not survive that encounter.
Well, there are statistics to back that up as well. So
Amazing.
yeah.
So, from your perspective in law enforcement, tell me some of the things that jump out at you here looking at this video.
First off, there is some issues that you don't see in the video, and what actually created this entire problem, from what I understand, is that a gentleman pulling a trailer did not use that properly, the turn lane properly, and caused a problem with the flow of traffic right there. This gentleman had pulled up preemptively and basically blocked the intersection so the gentleman in the F-150 couldn't get around. That being said, there was some behavioral issues right after that. Maybe an exchange of words. Ultimately, the gentleman pulled up and, as you can see, kind of blocked the doorway to where he couldn't get out, exited the vehicle with a presentation of a potential weapon in his hand. As we said before, this is a 17-second event. There's a lot to unpack. I guess first and foremost, where would you go with the self-defense aspect?
Sure. Well, and so, again, looking at self-defense, the way our law defines it, and one of the interesting things here, I think, is the first thing that we look at is the innocence of the defender.
Correct.
And if you are not innocent in this defensive interaction, well, then you don't get to claim self-defense under our law. And really, it's under the law of any state that employs a self-defense standard. And all 50 states have a self-defense standard that's similar to ours, at least has the same elements, although there are certainly some states that require a duty to attempt to retreat. We're not one of those. But other than that, pretty much every state has these same elements to their self-defense laws. So when we're talking innocence, one of the questions that might come up is the guy who blocked the intersection innocent? Because technically he is violating the law by blocking the intersection.
Yeah.
However,
that's a whole different set of rules. That's traffic law versus criminal law.
And so I guess we look at that from the standpoint of saying, hey, you've got to look at the big picture. You have to take everything into account, because a motivated prosecutor, for any reason, if this had gone differently than it went, might have said, well, we're going to take a look at every angle here possible and try to establish that the person who shot the guy with the hammer is actually the one in the wrong. Now, again, that's not what happened here, and so we don't really have that consideration as big of a factor.
Correct.
But looking at all the laws of self-defense, this was clearly an imminent threat.
Absolutely.
This guy's advancing with a hammer, and when we were talking previously, you made a very interesting comment about sort of the manner of walking that the hammer guy employed here.
I mean, if a contractor is walking up to you with a hammer to have a conversation about how he's going to fix your roof, that you can't obviously present your weapon. You shouldn't. However, with this incident, the man exchanges violent words, gets out of the vehicle with hammer present, and then bear walks towards the victim in this case.
Yeah.
And I mean, that tells you a lot right there for self-defense.
This wasn't a casual stroll. No. Hey man, how you doing? Boy, these lights are crazy, aren't they?
Yeah.
No, this was, I'm walking with purpose, with intent, and I've got a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And I've pulled right up on your truck's door. There's no way you can exit. You can't pull forward. You can't back up. You can't turn out of this encounter because of the traffic that's in there. And so effectively, you as the driver of this pickup truck are trapped and subject to the mercy of this guy with a hammer who, as you said, is, preceding this video, this segment, there was an exchange of words, cussing back and forth, it appears, or at least from the guy who was inconvenienced.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely it's a situation where you as the driver who's stuck in your truck, you got to be alert and aware. And
the word you just said, inconvenience, I love that, because at the end of the day, the victim blocking the intersection was just that. It was nothing more than an inconvenience. Right. It's certainly not worth going to jail for or losing your life for.
Right.
As from the other side of the fence,
right.
as an assailant.
Right.
This whole situation was beyond words.
It's stupid.
Yeah.
This is something that when I present seminars on self-defense law, one of the things I always talk about is ego.
Yeah.
And ego is by far and away, I think, the biggest cause of problems that escalate into deadly force where it may not have been needed.
Correct.
But somebody's ego just got in the way. And this poor guy, I get it. I get his frustration at being blocked in the intersection. And now he's got to wait the entire cycle of lights, again, 3-4 minutes. And with that level of traffic, it may even take longer. I get it. But, man, check your ego. Don't decide that you need to get out and bring a hammer and go up and hit somebody's vehicle because you've been delayed maybe 5 minutes in the course of your evening.
Of course, you can't go off hindsight, but I will stand by that. It's my belief that he may have encroached further on the individual had the truck not been parked in that position. I feel that the front end of his truck limited him from getting any closer to the victim, and I think that he probably would have, judging by the way he got out of that vehicle. Yeah,
and in case it's not clear, again, the aggressor's truck in this instance was pulled up literally, looks like within inches of the door of the other truck, but based on the position of the front of his vehicle, he had no access to the driver of that vehicle, and I think you could be right. Had that, position not been the case, this might be a very different video.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, one of the questions that I would have is, if I'm sitting in my truck, blocked by traffic, blocked by this aggressive driver, and I see this guy coming out with a hammer, I'm probably going to be on my pistol. I'm probably going to have it out in my lap, oriented towards him, but under the door frame, so it's not visible yet until I'm certain what the risk is, what the threat is that's being presented.
Yeah.
And as this guy steps forward, if he keeps coming towards me and brings that hammer up, well, I'm presenting that pistol. And I think the law is going to justify me in doing that because now I'm meeting force with force. And this, I don't think, is a disproportional type of force that could be picked apart. Now, again, a motivated prosecutor may well be able to say, well, it was a hammer and you could have leaned back and he couldn't have gotten you. That's not the argument, because if I have to lean back, that means you're imposing a duty to retreat on me, which is not permissible under our law. But I think there is an appropriate time that you go to a pistol in a situation like this.
As far as duty to retreat, you're in the cockpit of a vehicle. Granted, in this case, it's a large truck. However, it's still hard to move and have that mobility. There are people out there that practice day in, day out shooting that have, right at that 1 second draw time. That's further complicated when you're sitting in a vehicle. So I see no issue with having a weapon in hand. I don't know that I would necessarily train it on them at that point, because this is all based on perception, especially if it goes to court. You're going to have one party saying their version of the events, the other party saying their version of the events, and whatever information is presented to 12 jurors, they're going to have their perceptions on that they have to deliberate.
Sure.
So I think it would be more than okay to have that weapon in hand, like you said, maybe out of sight or at the low ready, and not necessarily present it until he is a very clear and imminent threat to your safety.
Right. And, again, in a situation that unfolds as quickly as this one did, it could be a little challenging to understand really where that point occurs.
Yeah.
But the simple fact is, the totality of these circumstances, I think, would absolutely justify, as you said, having that weapon ready to go.
Yeah.
And if there becomes a moment where you believe the risk is trained on you, and it's not a threat just to your vehicle, I think that presenting that weapon as a means of saying, hey, you don't want this to go any further, is not a bad call.
No. No.
You know, unfortunately, as you know, I've seen several times where somebody did the right thing, they still end up getting arrested. But
Could happen.
we sort those things out later on in court. But yeah, here you're right. I mean, it's perception, and that's really one of the key elements in self-defense law. Is, you know, there's got to be subjective reasonableness about that whole situation, and that's, you know, subjective means it's all about me as the defender, how I perceive things. But there also has to be an established objective reasonableness, meaning it takes me out of it, my own personal feelings of the situation out of the mix, and puts a reasonable person in my shoes.
Correct.
And I've got to be able to demonstrate that a reasonable person in my shoes also would have perceived that this was a threat that required immediate response in order to prevent death or serious bodily harm.
Absolutely.
If we're talking deadly force, of course. And a hammer, again, certainly is deadly force. But in this case, Mr. Hammer Guy, you know, clearly either one, thought the better of it in the end, or two, never really had the will to carry out a physical attack on the driver of the other vehicle. Instead, he gives a half-hearted and ill-advised smack to the tire and almost racks himself, which just would have been awesome video in my book. Slaps the vehicle and then hits the bumper.
Gives that little ting at the end.
Yeah. That little ting, though, interestingly, you know a little bit more about the details of this. This guy was arrested for what he did.
Yeah.
Not the driver of the truck that was blocked in, but the guy with the hammer was arrested. Mm-hmm. What was the charge in that case?
It was a property damage charge. I believe it was destruction of property.
Yeah.
So,
felony level, was it not?
I believe it was felony level. Yeah. Yeah. Now, the terms of the agreement, I'm not sure of.
Right.
But yeah, it was a felony.
But it's been worked out in court, and I think he has the option, if he can follow the rules for a period of time, I think a couple of years, that could be reduced to a misdemeanor or maybe even dismissed altogether, which under our law is permitted under what's called a deferred adjudication. And so, but interesting that this guy did get charged, and honestly, in that scenario, he was the one who was at fault. I mean, this was his doing. He was inconvenienced. He let his ego take over, and you know, again, while any one of us who lives in this county can attest, we've probably experienced that kind of frustration as well. But it comes back to being able to check your ego and not do something stupid that is going to now put you in the crosshairs of law enforcement.
Roll your eyes, mutter something under your breath. But, you know, in this particular case, that could have been 17 seconds to the rest of his life. Yeah. You know?
Absolutely.
In no world is that worth it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, no doubt. Well, guys, I think this is a pretty interesting video, and again, there's a lot more we could probably dig into here if we really wanted to, getting into issues of shooting angles, and you know, that does remind me of one thing that we probably need to reference is that had the driver decided to shoot, man, there's a whole host of people, traffic, vehicles, everything behind the target. It's a big decision as a shooter to decide, I've got the angle that I need to take this shot.
If I'm not mistaken, this was either on a Friday or a Saturday, which is a high traffic night.
Ridiculous traffic nights in that area.
On your average 24-hour time period, you have thousands of cars that go through that intersection. So I'm sure that was amplified with the day of the week that it was on. Yeah. And, also you have that highway that would have been in the backdrop. So, just a simple rule of the range, and it should be a rule of life, know your target and what is beyond it. Yeah, so.
Absolutely great point. Yeah, so guys, appreciate you hanging out with us here for this discussion. Would love to hear your thoughts, comments in the comments section below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, would love to have you do so. Hit that like button, share the video, please, and appreciate you sticking around with us. We will see you in the next one, and until then, take care and stay safe.